I want you to think about how many times in a day you tell a story, whether it's real or whether it's fiction. Because we tell fictional stories all the time through exaggerated anecdotes, and we make up lies too, which are basically very believable stories. For example, I could tell an exaggerated story that, like, oh, my teacher was so mad she had lasers coming out of her eyes. That's not true, but it's an exaggeration of the truth. So in a way, it's fiction. So that's me telling a story within my day-to-day life. Another point here is that a lie is just a very realistic work of fiction that we use to explain our current circumstances, right? Because the best lies are the ones that are believable or are the ones that could come true. So a lie is basically just a very cohesive story. It's a story that aligns very well with reality, so to say. Today, I'm going to show you why and how to read fiction so that you become a better reader, a better thinker, a better artist, and more aware of reality as we know it. Because reading fiction can make you more creative, but it can also make you more aware of your circumstances. It can kind of give you a higher level understanding of what reality really is and what the nature of life actually is. Maybe you know the feeling of reading a passage from a book that really resonates with you. You really kind of relate with. Maybe if it's a scary thing, then it really scares you. Or if it's sad, you really relate to the emotions that the character in focus is really feeling. So we all have these books, these works of fiction that really resonate with us. But what do they have in common? Well, being a good writer requires a high level of cohesive thought and consequential awareness. You have to be aware of both the infinite possibilities out there, and you have to be able to express one of those infinite streams of potential in kind of this cohesive, well put together narrative that the reader can understand. Sorry, I'm reading some notes that I put together before, so if this doesn't sound like authentic or like me, then, that's why. Good writers are able to both be aware of whatever they could write, they're aware of what they could be, they're aware of what could happen, for example, but they're also able to express one of the infinite possibilities that they could write about in like a cohesive narrative. So they can write a story that makes sense, but they're also cognizant of all the stories that they could write. So they're aware of everything that could happen, but they're able to organize that infinite potential into one story that makes sense, right? Because let's say if I was a writer, but I didn't do that, well, I would then write a story that had no connectedness, that had no plot, that didn't make any sense, that just had a whole bunch of events that had no relation to each other. And it would just be a terrible story because no one would be able to understand it other than myself. So that's one of the hallmarks of a good writer and a good story as well. It's a well put together narrative that the reader can understand. Think of writing fiction as this analogy where you're taking a single snapshot of the multiverse. So like you're taking a single still picture of everything that will ever happen everywhere across all realities, and then you zoom in on one specific story to tell out of the billions of stories that you could actually tell. So you're picking one story with one timeline in one place with one group of characters with one resolution out of the billions upon billions of those that you could actually write about. So it does require some careful selection when you are writing fiction. So this model seems extremely limiting, but once you can do it with one of the snapshots, once you can do it well with one story, then you can write potentially millions more like it. So that being said, fiction can capture our emotions unlike anything else if the author knows what they're doing. If he or she can pull the heartstrings of the audience in such a precise and relatable way so that they evoke an emotional response, I'm reading off my notes again, but if If the author knows how people work and how people's emotions work, then they can write a kind of narrative that's going to appeal to their emotions. So being an author also requires a high understanding of people and their emotional capacity and how they work. You have to be able to do that in order to write a realistic story, in order to write a story that your audience is going to relate with. So you have to know people in order to write relatable characters. An author can write a successful piece by writing relatable characters, right? If they write a sad situation well, then the reader is going to become sad with the same kind of thing occurring with a happy or scary piece, right? If you write a really happy piece, you're going to make the reader appreciate life more. You're going to make the reader feel more optimistic. If you write a scary piece, like a scary story, then you're going to make the reader feel more paranoid, more cautious almost. Ultimately, it does depend on the kind of story that you're going to write. Because an excellent writer can manipulate the emotions and even the real life actions of the reader in real time through the message that they communicate, right? What you read determines your thoughts, and what you think determines how you act. So in a sense, a good author actually controls the emotions of people in real time and their actions as well. So authors, or good authors, are in fact very skilled manipulators at the end of the day. That's not a bad thing, but it's just how it is. I remember reading something like Schindler's List and looking at life with more gratitude because there's this guy, Oskar Schindler, right? If you ever seen the movie. I read the book to it as well, but you become so much more grateful for life when you read a book about suffering and war and these millions of Jews dying in concentration camps and how this one German guy saved thousands of them through his charity. Like, reading something like that just makes you so much more thankful that you're alive and well. Or if you're reading something science fiction-y, like science fiction horror, if you read something like 2,000 Leagues Under the Sea instead, for example, where it's something like horror fiction, you become more paranoid about what was really at the bottom of the lake every time you're on the beach, right? If I try going to the beach after I reach 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, I'm going to be very paranoid about what's in the sea, like what's in there, what could harm me, because I once read this book about sea monsters and this crazy captain who drove a submarine. So whether or not I actually believe that to be true, it's still going to influence my thoughts and my behavior. The best kind of fiction is kind of a sprinkle of irrationality that contains hints of reality. You can kind of think of good fiction writing as making a good chocolate chip cookie, because if we use the chocolate chip cookie example, like the actual dough that it's made from is reality, is what we know, and the chips, like the chocolate chips, are an example of irrationality, of infinite possibility, of chaos, right? So if you put those two things together and you balance them, you're going to get a good chocolate chip cookie and you're going to get a good story. Stories being irrational and basically impossible to happen in real life is what makes them entertaining. But relatable elements in stories is what makes them readable, right? So when we're writing a good piece of fiction and also when we're reading it, it's essential that both reality, what we're used to, and chaos, what we're not used to, is being introduced together and in balance, sort of in this yin-yang equilibrium of the familiar and the unfamiliar. So the challenge in writing a piece of fiction is making sure that there's equal parts of the explainable and the infinitely mysterious. So for example, something like Star Wars. I know it's not a book, but it is a work of fiction. What we're familiar with in Star Wars is the idea that humanity is advancing their technology, that they're going into the future, and that we're colonizing space. What we don't understand about Star Wars is that humanity lives in space now, and we have sentient droids, and we have these weird alien creatures that humanity is apparently associating with. So, using Star Wars as an example, there's like these weird elements such as aliens, space travel, spaceships, intergalactic war. But on the familiar side, there's stuff like humans and the human condition and people not getting along and war and death and stuff like that. So we get both what we're familiar with and what we're not familiar with in equal parts to create a very tantalizing story that encourages us to read more, but also makes sense to us in a very basic primal level. So we relate to it, but we don't relate with it, in a sense. We first made stories to explain why the sun rose at the beginning of the day and why it set at the end of the day, or why the lion ate the gazelle and not us, for example. These are called myths, or like native tales that like ancient tribal people would tell. And they were stories on a fundamental level, but they were also stories used to explain why certain stuff happened. So another reason why you should read fiction is because, well, maybe you're saying it's a waste of time right now. Maybe you're looking at me and you're saying, well, why would I read fiction? It's kind of a waste of time. Why wouldn't I just read nonfiction and that'd be it? Well, fiction helps you read faster, right? Reading a fictional book helps you train your reading speed because it's less to take in. And it gives you extra benefits like I described above, right? It makes you more introspective and it makes you question reality and observe it even closer, right? Introspection is what you get when you read fiction and you become more aware of your own reality because you study these characters and their inner thoughts and their struggles, and you identify with them, and once you identify with them, you become more aware about yourself. It also makes you question reality because if fiction is so similar to reality, then what's the divide, right? It makes you think. It makes you observe reality even closer than you did before because you're looking for the similarities between reality and fiction once you read a fictional work. So your actionable step for this video is to go and read a fictional book, obviously. Well, what I like to do is I like to go on Reddit or Quora even and search up reading list, like fictional reading list. I just type that into the search bar. I hit enter. I click on whatever results I get. And usually it's some kind of link on like a Reddit post to a reading list, to someone's personal reading list. And then I just copy that. And then I make my own reading list based off of what they suggested. And then maybe I start reading whatever book seems interesting to me. And then once I've done that book, then I move on to books similar to it, or I keep going on that one reading list. And that's how you read a lot of fiction books over like the span of a week, right? You just pound through them. But what I recommend to do when balancing fiction and nonfiction in your reading schedule is to read at least one nonfiction book for every fiction book you read. For example, what I'll do is I'll read a nonfiction book for like 2 hours a day, and then I'll read a fictional book for like half an hour per day when I'm about to go to sleep, for example, because reading fiction, especially if it's like boring stuff, it actually helps you sleep quite a bit. Like I'll just lay in bed and I'll read for like half an hour before I feel like falling asleep. It's a pretty effective schedule, but yeah. So basically just take a look at what results you get from that Reddit search for reading lists and save whatever reading list interests you. Just work your way through it, reading through whatever seems good for you. From there, you can just keep to that list or read books similar to what other books you like. Personally, I'm on my horror science fiction written by boomer guys who grew up in small town America and dodged the Vietnam War arc. You know, Stephen King, Kurt Vonnegut, Orson Scott Card, reading all that kind of stuff. So that's going to do it for this video. Like and subscribe. Comment if you want more videos like this where I do philosophical deep dives. I think I really got to work on articulating myself, but hey, that's just me. Yeah, leave a comment if you want me to do more philosophical stuff, talk about weird shit. Yeah, I'll keep trying to increase the quality of these videos. So yeah, I'll see you later.